We've all heard it a million times, right? The golden rule of fitness is super simple. Just get up and move. Any exercise is good exercise. But what if that's not the whole story? We're about to look at some really compelling data that suggests the kind of exercise you do can matter a lot, and in some ways you probably wouldn't expect. So, is all exercise really created equal? I mean, does going for a jog give you a totally different set of health perks compared to, say, swimming or lifting weights? That's the big question we're diving into today. And we're going to do it by digging into a fascinating study that links specific activities to some very specific health outcomes. All right, so to get some real answers, we're not just guessing here, we're turning to this massive long-term health study that was published in the journal Sport Sciences for Health. Basically, a team of researchers in Russia collected a ton of data to see if they could finally connect the dots between the sports people play and the diseases they might get. And when I say this study was big, I mean it. First off, they looked at data stretching across 17 years. Think about that. This isn't just a quick snapshot in time. A 17-year view is absolutely crucial if you want to understand how our exercise habits really affect our health in the long run. And get this, the number of people they surveyed was huge. We're talking almost 32,500 individuals. Now, when you're working with a sample size that big, the patterns you start to see, they're not just random noise. This is where you get some really powerful insights into what's actually going on with our bodies. Okay, so with all of that data, where do you even start? Well, the researchers started with a pretty simple question. Which activities are linked to people just feeling healthier? You know, who was most likely to rate their own health as good or even very good? And it turns out the answers were surprisingly specific. So, what did they find? Well, it turns out that only two types of activities had a really strong, consistent link to people feeling good about their health. The first one makes sense, using exercise equipment, going to the gym. But the second one, this one was a little bit of a surprise. It was combat sports, things like fighting, boxing, karate. Yep, people who did these activities were the ones who consistently rated their health higher than pretty much everyone else. But feeling healthy is one thing. What about actual diagnosed diseases? The researchers decided to go a level deeper. They started hunting for statistical links between specific sports and the actual likelihood of having certain chronic illnesses. And let me tell you, this is where things get really, really interesting. And honestly, a little weird. Okay, so take a look at this. Some of this stuff makes perfect sense, right? Jogging and skiing. They're linked to a lower risk of heart disease. No surprise there. Using gym equipment, a lower risk of diabetes, great. But then your eyes drift over to that higher risk column and things start to get strange. Bicycling, for example, was linked to a higher risk of kidney disease. But the real head scratcher is at the bottom. Pleasure walking? It wasn't linked to a lower risk of anything. Instead, it was associated with a higher risk of heart disease, spinal problems, eye problems, you name it. So, what on earth is going on here? And this right here, this is the biggest puzzle in the entire study. Let's call it the pleasure walking paradox. I mean, how could walking, the most gentle, the most accessible, the exercise that doctors recommend to literally everyone, how could it possibly be linked to a higher chance of having all these serious health issues? It just doesn't add up. And look, I'm not exaggerating this. This quote is pulled word for word from the study. The data showed a clear, positive association, which is just science speak for a higher likelihood, between pleasure walking and a whole list of chronic diseases. It completely flies in the face of common sense, right? So I know exactly what you're thinking right now, because I was thinking the same thing. How can this possibly be right? Should I stop going for my daily walk? Is walking secretly bad for me? Okay, deep breath. The answer, thankfully, is a big no. But the explanation for why the data looks like this is super important for understanding how science works. The whole mystery boils down to this one key idea: reverse causality. Here's how it works. The study's authors point out that one of the very first things a doctor will tell you to do after you've been diagnosed with chronic illness is go for a walk. So it's not that walking is causing heart disease. It's that having heart disease is causing people to take up walking. That skews the data, creating this big group of walkers who already have health problems. See, the disease leads to the walking, not the other way around. Okay, so now that we've solved that paradox, what does this all mean for you and me? What are the big takeaways from this whole deep dive? how can we actually turn all this complicated data into simple, useful advice for our own workouts? All right, let's break it down into 3 simple takeaways. First, maybe it's time to choose your exercise with a specific goal in mind. If you're thinking about your heart health, for instance, this study suggests jogging might be a fantastic choice. Second, and this is the big one, do not be afraid of walking. It's an amazing activity. You just have to remember that this study's data was probably skewed because of that reverse causality we talked about. And that brings us to the golden rule, number 3. Association is not the same as causation. Just because 2 things are linked in the data doesn't mean one caused the other. So the big takeaway here isn't to stop exercising, of course. It's to be a little more intentional, to think about why you're working out and what you're hoping to get out of it. What this study really shows us is that our choices might have more targeted effects than we ever thought. So I'll leave you with this question. Now that you know not all exercise is created equal, what's your next workout going to be? Thanks for tuning in.